So, there you have it, a failure or a success. You could argue that's applicable to any game, I guess, but in this case the devs made something special, a roguelite city builder. While city builders with roguelite elements perhaps exist, like Frostpunk you could argue with randomized events, or Thea 2 maybe, I've never encountered a game quite like Against the Storm, which releases into early access on November 1st. It has the roguelite part deeply and natively integrated into the city builder genre, so the question is valid. Does it work? Well, it depends, I'm sorry to say. A bit of a buzzkiller maybe, but it is not a clear yes or no. It will depend entirely on your preferences. So, my job here today is to explain how exactly this roguelite city builder works without explaining the entire game, and then it's up to you to make a decision and make up your own mind if you're into this. My early access review will therefore mostly revolve around that aspect, because I feel it is the decisive factor. Everything hinges on this combination. After all, plenty of great city builders are out there, plenty of great roguelites are out there, but the combination, it's quite unique. As always in my reviews, I'm starting with the settings. You can rebind all of the keys, which is great. There are a few graphical options, but this isn't a very taxing game at all, and for me the game ran great at an i7 2080 and 1440p. I almost always had 144 frames per second, which is my monitor refresh rate. There are a whole bunch of gameplay options which will come in handy, especially after you've played the game for a little bit and you know what you want to do whenever you build a new city. It is sufficient, I would say, the options. With that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the story before we dive into the roguelite aspect. In Against the Storm, you are a viceroy in the service of the Scorched Queen. It is your job to create and manage settlements, get resources from those settlements by fulfilling several ever-changing win conditions, and then use those resources to advance the big city in the center of the world map called the Smoldering City. That's the story, and that is also the roguelite element. What basically happens is that you are starting a new settlement over and over again to collect these resources, to buy upgrades and buildings and unlock special features which you can then use in your next settlement. Roguelite. You get more options the more settlements you build and complete, and by unlocking more stuff the game gets easier to play. This allowed me, for example, to crank up the difficulty, generating even more resources and upgrading the Smoldering City even faster. And that is the gameplay loop and the potential issue. It's completely interwoven, the loop and the issue. The gameplay loop, I just explained it, right? Build a settlement, complete the objectives, get resources as a reward, upgrade the big skill tree using those resources, and repeat. The issue here is that you are constantly creating a new settlement, and you're starting from scratch every time. I have played for about 20 hours now and I must have done at least 15 settlements. It's the roguelite repetition, but within a city builder. And you have to appreciate that. If you don't, this gets old pretty fast. So this whole thing got me thinking, right? I poured myself a whiskey on a Friday night and contemplated about the following question. What makes a roguelite game so great? And why is my issue with the repetition much more prevalent in this city builder, and maybe in any city builder, than in, for example, a deck builder like Slay the Spire, or an action game like Vampire Survivors? Is there maybe a reason why developers aren't combining roguelites and city builders all that often? I think there is. What I figured out is that in various other roguelite games, take Slay the Spire for example, the roguelite element can truly lead to a completely different and broken combination of cards. Due to RNG, runs are significantly different and you're getting stronger, and you see those effects quite clearly during the runs. Doing massive damage with your cards after a bunch of relics just feels so good, and because you never know you will achieve that state up front, there is a certain excitement within each run, a certain hope that the cards fall your way and you can just blast the game. While conceptually, Against the Storm works exactly the same way, in that you are constantly unlocking features that make you stronger and there's a ton of variety in the gameplay, I ultimately didn't feel the same way I felt with other roguelites. It is less defined, your strength and progression. You don't see huge damage numbers, it's just very tiny and incremental improvements, so that managing your villagers and economy, all your typical city builder stuff, is easier, but only marginally easier. The impact is there, and you do unlock entirely new features like setting up trade routes, making you easy money, which allows for a much easier city management, but the impact is still rather minimal. You might finish the required objectives a few minutes faster than with your previous settlement, but that's about it. You have more variations in getting to the required goals in each and every settlement run, because you should see building a settlement as playing a run in Slay the Spire, but the effects are barely noticeable, in my opinion. What I'm saying is, a good roguelite game works on all levels. It has fun upgrades that make your characters stronger, but more importantly, the gameplay loop within the game itself, so playing that Slay the Spire run, is fun and challenging and heavily impacted by whatever you discover in those runs. I'm still having fun in Against the Storm, even getting close to the 20-hour mark. And I'm looking forward to starting new settlements, as there is a lot of variety. But that is more because of the city building aspect of this game, which is extremely solid. It is not because I'm curious necessarily about what the game is going to throw my way this time, the roguelite element. Because it doesn't affect my settlements all that much. There's never this idea that I've made a completely broken settlement, in a good way, where my villages are, I don't know, creating this massive economy. Nah, they can carry 5 more wood sticks because I unlocked that, and that's it. Against the Storm has a bit of an issue here, in my opinion. The gameplay itself is extremely solid. It is a great city builder in its own right, with good quality of life features, clear indicators, a fantastic UI honestly, one of the best I've ever seen, tons of buildings and a big variety on how to set up a working economy. But its merits are on the city builder side, with the roguelite aspect as a feature, I guess, but in my mind, the impact of that is very limited. It does provide a sense of progression because of the massive skill tree that exists and all the meaningful unlockable features, but that is about it. It's not like the roguelite elements are poorly implemented or something, like not at all. The game does bring all sorts of variation, and honestly, the roguelite implementation is, I guess, as good as it gets. I'm just questioning the impact of it all. But let me talk a little bit about all this variety and get a bit more into the game itself with some examples that illustrate how diverse everything is. For example, the game has 4 races, with one more coming up in early access. Humans, beavers, lizards and harpies. And each race has their strengths and each race has certain things they excel at, plus they all have different needs and things that make them happy and increase their morale. For example, the beavers are great woodcutters, they enjoy collecting dew and they want to eat specific food and wear raincoats, because it's raining all the damn time in this game. That's a minor side note, but it's literally raining all the time because of lore reasons, and I wish that from time to time you would see a little bit of sunshine on your lovely villages, you know? But either way, that's one part of variation, the races you start with. And you always start with 3 of them, and you're always missing 1 race, so you have to deal with that. More variety lies in the buildings you can use or build. Every run you have to win the game by getting to 14 reputation points, and you have all sorts of ways to do so. Every few reputation points you unlock a blueprint and you get to choose a new building you can now construct, very similar to choosing a relic in other roguelites. While this does change the game somewhat, I feel the impact isn't big enough that your run, your 15th settlement, feels significantly different from the previous 14. That is mostly because all buildings fulfill 3 needs and there's quite a bit of overlap between buildings, and you typically just take any blueprint that provides you with resources you don't have yet, so you can set up a working economy. At first glance it seems like a lot of variety, but once you get the hang of the economy there's really only 1 or 2 actual choices out of the 4, let's say. Within the game world itself there is variety in RNG as well, both on the world map as well as in the create a settlement gameplay loop. In the big world map with the smoldering city in the middle, you can see a whole bunch of biomes. Biomes each have their own characteristics, which you will notice once you start a new settlement there. Furthermore, the world map has sometimes treasures or positive or negative modifiers, which once again you will encounter when starting a settlement in that area. These modifiers also give specific rewards, which you need for specific upgrades in the skill tree. The Create Your Settlement gameplay loop, which is basically just building a settlement, has always a randomized layout. You are starting every time in a small glade or an open area in the forest, and you need to cut your way through other glades. Those then contain more resources, which you will need typically to advance the settlement, and sometimes, especially the larger, more dangerous glades, have glade events you need to solve. There's no combat in this game, but you can sort of fight the evil forest demons by assigning villagers to the task, equipping them with the right tools and resources, and then they start solving the glade events. This gives you more resources or reputation, advancing your win conditions. All in all, you can't really argue that the devs didn't put enough variety or variation in the game, or that they didn't implement the roguelite elements as well as they could. There is a whole lot of variation worthy of a roguelite. However, despite all of the variation, for me personally, I didn't feel each settlement was that different from the next or the previous one. I would always start out with the same buildings in the same order because there are a sort of fixed number of buildings that you have regardless of, the roguelite elements. And I used that same order because I found it to be effective. Then I would start my food production and advanced building materials because you need that for advanced buildings, and food keeps the morale high of your villagers, which is essential because otherwise they leave. And then ultimately you're just putting the dots on the I and you're striking the T's, just to make a bit more reputation milestones to win that particular settlement. Every run does follow the same structure. You then get more resources, some upgrades in the smoldering city, and that's pretty much it. Sure, you can increase the difficulty, but that shouldn't be required to enjoy the game first of all, and besides, it doesn't essentially change the whole gameplay loop either. It's not that the settlements and completing the win conditions are lacking challenges, because it can be challenging. It is just that solving these challenges is typically done the same way, or at least using the same logic. What I'm really missing is that overpowered Slay the Spire poison build moment where I'm just comboing 14 cards and one-shotting the final boss. That part, for me, makes roguelites so rewarding and fun, when you get the perfect combination of stuff and you just know you're going to absolutely demolish each and every one. It doesn't exist in Against the Storm. You're just building another settlement, facing more or a bit less resistance, but the big payoff moments simply aren't there, because the effects of all your labor are just you completing the settlement a bit faster than you otherwise would. There's one more issue I personally have with this game, and it comes back to the same topic honestly, and that's that I really don't like abandoning your settlements over and over again. In city builders, I care about the cities I create. I care about the aesthetics. I want to achieve certain goals and milestones. I want to see my settlers work in a functioning economy, making use of the infrastructure, resources, and buildings. I want to have that feeling that what I've made is actually being lived in and that everything is fine. That is all taken away because your settlement never exists for more than 1 hour, especially if you speed up the game a little bit, and then you work on the next one. It's not really about the settlements anymore, it is about the resources at the end. And I'm not sure that was a great idea. Yes, you can continue your settlement after you have reached the win conditions or, get the 14 reputation points, but doing that makes very little sense because you're not getting anything out of it. So you quit and you move on to the next settlement. And another kind of interesting thing is that there are seasons in this game, like in Path of Exile. During the review period, it was the season of the Haunted Ruins, which added some modifiers to the game. You can see how a new season would work, right? A new biome to build on, a few new buildings, maybe a new race, a new trader, new glade events. It could be small things. But again, I know I keep repeating this point, but it's the whole point of the review. It is just questionable for me if something like this keeps the game fresh enough that you can be bothered to create 15 more settlements. And honestly, if this is just a good idea at all on a fundamental level, that is probably the question you should ask yourself. Do I want to play a city builder that provides me with a ton of variety, really much more variety than your average city builder, but that also forces me to start a new settlement every hour? It's up to you. I would like to remind you, within this context of fundamental questions, that this is an early access game. It would be entirely possible that the developers add a few more game modes that completely counter this whole criticism. If there's a skirmish mode with a giant map, the same randomization on that giant map and like 50 reputation points to grind instead of 14, or even better, just enabling players to create those skirmish maps and conditions themselves, well, then you pretty much made my perfect game mode. I would play that game mode a lot, honestly. Similarly, you could make a standard mode, like in PoE, where seasons don't reset your entire progression, which is the case now it seems, so it doesn't feel so bad that all your work is being removed every 2 weeks or so. I really hope stuff like that gets implemented. I realize it is taking a path away from the roguelite part, but I'm not sure how enjoyable that roguelite part is going to be in the long run. And I think you would add a potentially massive audience to your game with relatively easy changes after all. You can keep the settlement gameplay mostly the same, just give us a bigger map. I would think that's possible, but hey, whether the devs want to do it is an entirely different matter. Time for a conclusion. I think Against the Storm is a solid game. It's a great game actually. It's a very solid city builder. You can have quite a bit of fun just making these settlements. And all the features of the city builder part of the game are well done. However, as an experiment combining roguelites and city builders, I'm not convinced personally this is a great idea. That is a very personal thing, but I just would have preferred this to have a skirmish mode at least, so I can make this huge city and marvel at the work I have created. That is part of the charm for me in these city building games. And you will need to figure out what you prefer in that sense and see how the game evolves as well, because it's early access and we might just get a skirmish mode, who knows. If you want to stay updated with any sort of news regarding these indie games, you should subscribe to this channel. I am making more indie game reviews as well as my weekly roundup where I'm covering indie games, the news and the patches, and if a skirmish mode gets added, let's hope so, that is where you will hear about it for sure. I have a Steam curator page with indie games I recommend, also specifically for the Steam Deck if you have one, link in the description below. And that's it. Thanks for watching, love you all, see you soon, bye bye.